Hello everyone, welcome to Analog IAS Current Affair Analysis for 28th December 2020, and these are the articles that we'll be discussing today. Recently, the government has passed three farm bills which created a free trade regime in agriculture. So, the protest that we are witnessing right now is with respect to one particular act, especially from the farmers of Punjab. So, the present act that we're talking about is the Farmers Produce Trade and Commerce Protection and Facilitation Act. However, we also have to understand there are certain provisions which are a cause of concern in this case. Let us have a look at these provisions. But before that, let us also take a look at the Essential Commodities Act. So basically, what happened in the Essential Commodities Act is they did away with the center's powers to impose stockholding limits on foodstuffs. However, there is a caveat. There are certain extraordinary circumstances under which the government can still impose the uh, stockholding limits on foodstuffs. For example, in the recent times, after this act was amended, we have seen the government invoking the Essential Commodities Act to prevent onion prices going beyond a certain threshold. So, as per the law, if perishable goods increase beyond 100%, the price of the perishable goods increase beyond 100%, then they can impose this stockholding limits. Similarly, in the case of non-perishable items, it is 50%. Now, things have taken a political turn when a certain section of the farming community started believing that this move will actually put a restraint on their trading practices. So, for example, you have to understand that as per the amended law in Essential Commodities Act, uh, the amendments exempts processors, exporters, and other value chain participants. Now, what do you understand by this? Say, for example, a company wants to set up a tomato sauce manufacturing unit in a particular area. In that area, if the processor wants to stock up tomatoes, even when there is a shortage in the market, he is allowed to do so because he has taken from the government a permission seeking the same thing. So it is only a problem if he is hoarding this beyond a certain limit, beyond his installed capacity. And there are restrictions on traders. We still have these restrictions because there is a possibility that they are not adding any value or creating any jobs or end product for export or domestic consumption here. They're just trying to make money. So government has rightly imposed certain restrictions on traders. So this should not be a problem, but farmers are fearing that corporates will exploit them. That is a unwarranted fear, and the government must address the benefits of corporates trying to enter the agribusiness. The government must play a role of being a regulator and as well as a facilitator, both for corporates and farmers in this case. The second act is about contract farming. It is titled the Farmers Empowerment and Protection Agreement on Price Assurance and Farm Services Act. This has to do with providing a regulatory framework for contract cultivation. Say, for example, take the case of potato chips. A company like, say, Lays wants to enter into an agreement for a particular quality and gradation of potatoes with farmers. This will ensure that as long as the farmers ensure the quality, that they will be getting a certain minimum guarantee price as per the contract. So this is also a benefit to the farmer. And also here the government must play a role of a regulator and a facilitator in case the companies are trying to ensure that they are exploiting the farmers. In that case, they should act as a regulator, and whenever there are certain issues with quality, it should act as a facilitator to help the farmers to ensure that quality. In this way, the government can bridge the gap between the companies and the farmers. This will increase the price discovery and ensure a stable income for farmers. Till now, farming has never been a stable entrepreneurial activity. The vision of our country should be to move towards that entrepreneurial ability, and look at farming enterprise as a profit making venture. If that is not happening, no matter whatever we do, if there is no price discovery, farmer will continue to suffer or he will have low incomes, which is completely unethical given the fact that he toils so hard for his produce. Now, this brings us to the third and problematic act of FPTC. So, the bone of contention here is it allows sale and purchase of farm produce outside the premises of APMC mandis. So, previously it was mandated that all the produce should be sold at APMC mandis only. What this means is previously the state government used to get a certain fee for trading on this platform. Now the law has actually removed that market fee and also said that the players who are involved in this trade can actually carry out a no market fee model, or there is no cess or there is no levy. So under any state APMC act or any other state law, the government cannot do anything with this respect. So essentially it is taking away the power from state governments. So this has been the problem. In order to understand this issue, let us go into the constitutional provisions and look at the powers of the union as well as the state in this respect. If we take a look at the entry number 33 in the constitution of the concurrent list, it covers trade and commerce in foodstuffs including edible oil and oil seeds, fodder, cotton and other stuffs like jute. But if you take a look at the trade and commerce aspect, they completely belong to the state. Even in the case of agricultural trade, it belongs to the state. Only those aspects which are related to the interstate trade aspect, they are under the concurrent list. So the question asked right now is, with which power is the government at the center trying to impose this FPTC Act? The answer is entry number 33 of the constitution. But is it a right interpretation? That is subject to judicial review. Preliminary understanding says that the center can pass any law that removes any obstacles to both inter and intrastate trade in farm produce while also overriding the existing state APMC acts. So the FPTC Act has in some way done exactly that. So some experts make a distinction between agricultural marketing and agricultural trade. This is open to interpretation and judicial review can be sought out. Some states like Maharashtra welcome this new act because they have a huge export potential. Say, for example, in the recent times, after the lockdown in the months of August and September, the government imposed the Essential Commodities Act because the government wanted to ensure domestic supply because the prices have crossed the threshold of 100%, which was set in the act. The farmers here in Maharashtra were not really happy because they were getting a good export price. They wanted to send it out. But when you take the case of farmers in Haryana, and if you take the case of farmers in Punjab as well, who have traditionally benefited from this Essential Commodities Act and the usual MSP regime, they wanted the MSP to be made a legal right. You have to understand that MSP is not a legal right, it is just a social welfare measure by most of the states. Now, in this context, in 2015, there was a report called the Shanta Kumar Committee report. This report said that just 6% of the farmers knew about the benefits of MSP. So that means Haryana and Punjab farmers or the lower Gangetic plain farmers in Uttar Pradesh and Bihar were the beneficiaries of this MSP regime, but not the rest of the farmers. Therefore, it is practically impossible for the government to procure everything through this MSP regime. Therefore, we have to ensure that this FPTC Act and the Essential Commodities Act, which prevents the stockholding and also all the farm laws, happen in reality and agriculture becomes a remunerative business. This article is in the context of the tug of war between Kerala governor and CM. Recently, the government has passed certain farm bills. So, to discuss that, the CM and his council of ministers decided that they need to have a assembly session, but the governor has rejected this request to summon a special sitting of the assembly to debate the farm bills. So this has brought out the political nature of the office of the governor, especially in a opposition rule state. So this has underlined the several instances which were also highlighted by the courts as to how the governor's role is becoming political. What is the role envisioned for the governor, and what is his role in arranging a assembly session? That is the central point that we are discussing in this article. So, what does the constitution actually say in this regard? So, Article 174, to quote verbatim, says that governor shall from time to time summon the house or each house of the legislature of the state to meet at such time and place as it thinks fit. This is the exact statement given in Article 174. So, what this essentially means is governor should be the point of authority to convene this assembly session, but there is a small caveat. It should happen as per the aid and advice which is laid down by the cabinet, and this is given in article 163. So on the periphery, even it looks like a prerogative of the governor to convene an assembly session, it is the aid and advice of the cabinet under article 163 which ensures that the aid and advice of the cabinet is binding on the governor. So when the governor summons the house under the article 174, that is not of his or her own but will be on the aid and advice of the cabinet. So the central question that was asked is, can the governor refuse this aid and advice of the cabinet? There are a few instances where the governor can indeed summon the house despite the chief minister who heads the cabinet denying it. So what are those conditions? Firstly, the CM should have lost the majority and the MLAs of the house propose a no confidence motion against the CM. So that is the first criteria. No confidence motion is in place. During that time, the governor can summon a session. Otherwise, whenever there is a no confidence motion, putting the power to convene a session in the hands of the CM who heads the cabinet will be against the principles of division of power. That is the reason governor is given the power to convene a session in that case. But in normal situations, it is the aid and advice of the cabinet and the chief minister. So the actions of the governor when using his discretionary powers can be challenged in the courts. You can also take into action this point. This again lays down the principle of checks and balances. What if the governor arbitrarily uses this power against the CM? So, for that purpose, we have judicial review for the decisions taken in this context. So, everything has checks and balances. In this context, there are certain precursors set by the Supreme Court. In a similar incident, in the Arunachal Pradesh context, a similar incident happened in 2016. So, in that context, what happened was the governor has imposed president's rule in the state of Arunachal Pradesh. Normal circumstances, it so happens that during the period when the CM enjoys the confidence of majority, the power vested under Article 174, as we have discussed, must be exercised with the aid and advice of the CM. In the above situation, what happened was governor decided on his own will that the constitutional machinery is failing in the state and has imposed the president's rule. So the court read in this particular instance that whatever is the function that is laid down under Article 174 is just that. It is just a function to be exercised by governor. That is, it is just his duty. It is not a power that he enjoys. So this means that Article 174 is a directive to carry out his constitutional function but not a constitutional power. That is to say, the cabinet headed by CM is the final deciding factor in this context. unless and until the no confidence motion has been passed against the CM. The same has also been reiterated in the Sarkaria Commission report as well. So we can use this in the answers as well. So what can be done in the present context is the legal question. If the Kerala government wants to go ahead and take the legal route, this is legally not feasible. The governor cannot deny to hold a session that is out of the constitutional limits that is placed on the governor's power. So he will not win in this particular case, and the Kerala government can go ahead and summon the house. They can hold a assembly session. That is the gist of this article, an important article. So whenever we are talking about federal relations or center state relations, governor's role has been a point of contention. So there is a possibility of governor's role in the context of uh, forming a government whenever there is a hung assembly. That is one issue. And secondly, they can ask what is the role of governor in the present case. This present example of Kerala can be taken as an example. Also, whenever we're talking about the relations between the center and states with respect to constitutional power, that is Article 356 as well, regarding the president's rule or constitutional emergency, this has also been a point of contention. So we have to prepare comprehensively about the role of governor and the misusage of Article 356 and what Sarkaria and Punchi Commission says in this respect. So this forms a part of the larger issue, that is federal relations, that is center state relations and its issues. So that is the gist of this article.